Okay, let me ask you this. How many times have you Googled best font pairings just hoping to find the perfect match for your design project? If that sounds familiar, you're not alone. Those things happen to me so many times and still happen to a lot of designers. You see, typography seems simple, but it's actually one of the biggest factors in great design. And when it's done right, it's almost invisible. Everything just feels cohesive and easy to read. Hey everyone, I'm Adi, and in this course we're going to break down web typography into clear, actionable steps so you can stop guessing and start designing with confidence. By the end, you'll know how to pick and pair fonts, how to build scalable typography systems, and actually understand why some typefaces work well together while some don't. And most importantly, you'll make sure your typography is readable, accessible, and responsive, so it looks great on any device. And this isn't about memorizing fonts or chasing trends. It's about understanding the principles behind good typography so you can make better design choices. This video is brought to you by Envato. Unlimited downloads of high-quality assets and a full stack of AI tools. Every type of asset for any type of project. Follow the link in the description and start creating now. Now, typography isn't just about making text look nice. It's about how people experience content. A good type system makes reading effortless, while bad typography creates unwanted friction. I mean, let's think about it. Would you trust a bank that uses Comic Sans on their website? Probably not. Would you be comfortable reading tiny text on a mobile device? Again, probably not. Typography affects how people feel about your design, how they interact with it, and ultimately whether or not they trust what they're reading. So, if you're ready to stop guessing and start designing with confidence, let's dive in. Reading feels effortless, right? You just look at words and you understand them. And that's true in most cases. The act of reading becomes muscle memory after a while. But under the hood, your brain is actually working way harder than you think. You see, when you read, your eyes don't move smoothly across the page from letter to letter. Instead, they jump in short bursts. These are called saccades. They're rapid back and forth eye movements, and in between those movements, your brain fills in the gaps to make sense of everything. Now, the length of these saccades varies from person to person. It depends on how skilled a reader you are, and also how familiar you are with the topic. For example, I can fly through an article about web design because I'm very familiar with the concepts and the terminology. But if you give me an article on, let's say, molecular biology, that's going to take a lot longer to go through. Even though it's, written in the same language, it's set in the same typeface, it's maybe the same length, my brain needs more time to process those unfamiliar terms. But it's not just what you're reading, it's also how the text is presented. If the font is too small, too cramped, or just hard to distinguish, reading goes from being effortless to feeling like work. And that brings us to two important concepts: legibility and readability. A lot of people mix these up, thinking they're the same thing. They're not. In a nutshell, legibility is about how easily you can recognize individual letters. It's all about the clarity of the typeface. Things like letter shapes, spacing, and contrast all affect legibility. Look at this example. The first word is set in a highly decorative typeface, while the second uses a serif font. And don't worry, we'll break down the type categories later in the course. But just look at these two words. The top one takes way more effort to read. Readability, on the other hand, is about how easy it is to read and process large blocks of text. Things like line spacing, line length, font size, and contrast all affect how smoothly your eyes move across and down the page. See the difference in this example? It's the same content, same typeface, but just by adjusting line spacing, font size, and contrast, we make the text on the right much easier to read. And great typography balances both. You want letters to be clear, but you also want the entire reading experience to feel natural. Now, let's dive deeper. What is typography? What do some of the key terms mean? And how do we classify fonts? Or should I say typefaces? In this lesson, we're diving into what typography really is, its history, why it's so crucial in web design. We'll also talk about some specific terminology and typeface classification. So, what is typography? Well, at its core, typography is the art of arranging type to make written language not only readable, but also engaging and visually appealing. So it's not just about picking a pretty font. It's about creating a visual voice for your content. Typography's roots go back to ancient civilizations. The earliest forms of writing, like Egyptian hieroglyphs and Roman inscriptions, were essentially the first structured letter forms. But the real typography revolution began in the 15th century with Johannes Gutenberg. In 1440, Gutenberg invented the movable type printing press, which allowed books to be mass-produced for the first time in history, and this changed the world. Books became more accessible, and type design became an art form. Early typefaces, like blackletter, were modeled after medieval calligraphy. They were dense and decorative, perfect for religious texts, but also hard to read. Over time, humanist typefaces emerged, inspired by traditional Latin letter forms and handwriting, leading to the birth of classic serif typefaces like Garamond. Now, as printing spread, type design evolved. The Industrial Revolution in the 19th century introduced slab serifs, which were used mainly for advertising. The 20th century saw the birth of modern, clean sans serifs like Helvetica. These typefaces were designed for clarity and functionality, reflecting the shift to a more modern design. Then came the digital age with computers and the web. Type wasn't just ink on paper anymore, it was pixels on a screen. And today we have platforms like Google Fonts that make typography accessible to everyone. But no matter how much technology changes, one thing stays the same. Typography is about communication. And when it comes to web design, this is especially important because most of the content in a web page is text. That's why choosing the right typography isn't just about aesthetics. It also impacts the user experience. So let's break it down into 3 key reasons why typography matters in web design. First, readability. If your text is hard to read, then people won't bother with it. Simple as that. So good typography ensures that the content is easy to scan and to digest, which directly impacts how users experience your website. Think about it. When you land on a web page, you don't start reading every word from top to bottom. Instead, your eyes scan for key information. Proper typography helps guide that process by making text easier to navigate. And there are several factors that affect readability, such as the font choice, the line length, the line height, and contrast. We'll get to these later in the course. Also, you should know that typography on the web isn't just about readability. Fonts are also expressive and artistic tools, and you'll often see decorative type used for branding, hero sections, or bold visual statements, and that's perfectly fine. However, it should be used sparingly, making sure that style doesn't come at the cost of clarity and usability. And speaking of, a typography is also a powerful branding tool. The typefaces you choose say a lot about your brand's personality, even before someone reads a single word. Think about brands you know. For instance, the bold sans serif Netflix uses feels modern and strong. Armani's elegant serif gives off a sense of luxury and sophistication. And these choices aren't random. They reinforce the brand's identity by setting the tone. And then there's accessibility. Not everyone experiences text the same way. Some people have visual impairments or dyslexia or other challenges that affect how they read. So choosing fonts with good letter spacing and clear letter forms makes your design usable for more people. Now, if you've worked in the design field, you've probably seen the terms font and typeface used interchangeably, but they're not actually the same thing. So let's clear this up. A typeface is a family of designs. Think of it like a music album. A font is just one design in that family. It's a very specific version of that typeface. Think of it like a song in that album. For example, Helvetica is a typeface. Helvetica Bold is a font. And fonts also refer to the storage medium of that design, aka the font file. And typefaces can be very simple, but also very complex. Take Figtree, a very clean geometric sans serif. It has 14 different fonts or styles. It's a relatively simple one. On the other side of the spectrum, let's look at Gotham, one of the staples in the typography world. This has a whopping 66 fonts, ranging from normal to narrow to extra narrow to condensed. So now that we've got that straightened out, let's look at the building blocks of typography. You see, every letter has different parts, and understanding them helps you make better type choices. And let me preface this by saying that type anatomy is a big topic. We could make an entire course about it because there are so many things to explore. In fact, there are people that wrote entire books on the topic, like this one called The Anatomy of Type, a graphic guide to 100 typefaces, written by Stephen Coles. In this course, however, I want to introduce you to the basics of type anatomy. So whenever you hear other people talk about typography, you can understand some of the terms they're using. Let's start with strokes. Letters are built from different strokes. These represent the various parts of the letter. Certain typefaces have strokes that vary dramatically in thickness. Take Bodoni Moda, for example. Notice how some parts of the letter are extremely thin, while others are much thicker. This distinct variation in stroke weight is what defines high contrast typefaces. Other typefaces maintain a uniform stroke width throughout, like Helvetica. If you look closely, you'll see that the thickness of the strokes stays the same from start to finish. These are known as monoline typefaces. So remember these first two concepts: stroke, which represents a letter part, and contrast, which represents the weight difference of a specific stroke. Now, let's move on to three key terms you'll often hear in typography, and that's baseline, X height, and cap height. The baseline is the invisible guideline where most letters sit, keeping text aligned. The X height measures the height of lowercase letters, from the baseline to the top of the letter. And even though it's called X height, this doesn't refer specifically to the lowercase x. Since the height of X typically matches this measurement, it's an easy way to remember the term. Finally, the cap height is the height of uppercase letters, running from the baseline to the top of letters like H or T. Now, there are also specific names for the different parts of the letter, so let's look at some of the more common ones. Ascenders are parts of lowercase letters that rise above the X height, like the top of H or D. Descenders are parts of lowercase letters that drop below the baseline, like the tail of G or Y. A counter is the enclosed space inside a letter, like in O or P. A stem is the main vertical stroke in letters like T or L. A crossbar is the horizontal stroke that connects two vertical stems in a letter. Examples include the bar in the letter A or H. A shoulder is the curved or sloped stroke that connects to a vertical stem, typically seen in letters like N, H, or M. An aperture is the opening or negative space within a letter, often found in letters like C, S, or E. It's the area inside a letter form that's not filled with the main stroke. Finally, a serif is the small decorative stroke or finishing detail at the ends of a letter's main stems or strokes. Serif fonts like Times New Roman and Garamond have serifs, while sans serif fonts like Arial and Helvetica do not. Now, sometimes the features of a typeface are purely aesthetic, but they add character and personality to a design. Take, for instance, ink traps. Originally, they were a technical solution in printing, designed to prevent ink from bleeding at small sizes. But in today's digital typography, they're unnecessary. Yet, some modern fonts like Polysans use exaggerated ink traps as a design choice. While they don't serve a functional purpose anymore, they add a distinctive, edgy look that makes the typeface stand out. Now, when discussing typography, there are three key concepts related to spacing and alignment, and those are kerning, tracking, and leading. Kerning refers to the space between two specific letters. This is adjusted so they don't look too far apart or too close together. Tracking refers to the space between all the letters in a word or sentence. This is adjusted to make the entire text more evenly spaced. Finally, leading refers to the space between lines of text. This is also called line height. Adjusting this makes sure the lines aren't too close or too far apart. Now, if you're wondering why I'm giving you all of these terms, well, the reason is simple. Knowing the language of typography helps you understand why a typeface looks the way it does, where it comes from, and also what it's best used for. It's also a very powerful tool when comparing to typefaces. More about that in the next lesson, where we talk about choosing and pairing typefaces for the web. Now that we've covered the basics of typography terminology, it's time to dive into typeface classification. This helps us group typefaces based on their design, history, and purpose. And because typography constantly evolves with culture and technology, there is not a universal system for classification. Instead, we have a few categories that are widely recognized, such as serif, sans serif, and script, just to name a few. Some categories go even deeper. For instance, serif typefaces can be split into old style, which includes typefaces like Bembo, and modern, which includes typefaces like Bodoni, depending on their design features and historical background. And while no classification is set in stone, these groups give you a very solid starting point for choosing the right typeface for your project. Let's begin with the serif category. These typefaces have a classic and elegant look, characterized by small strokes or extensions at the ends of letters, called serifs, which is where the category gets its name. Serif typefaces are ideal for projects that need a sense of tradition, formality, or elegance. They're commonly used in print, for books, newspapers, and magazines because of their readability and longer text. In this category, we can find typefaces like Times New Roman, Garamond, Baskerville, Bodoni, and Georgia. On the flip side, we have the sans serif category. This includes more modern typefaces that are very clean and lack those decorative serifs, hence the name sans serif. Their simplicity makes them highly versatile and easy to read, especially on digital screens, which is why they're widely used for web design and user interfaces. In this category, we can find typefaces like Helvetica, Futura, Envato, Inter, and Open Sans. Then we have slab serifs. They are a type of serif typeface that stands out for their thick, block-like serifs, giving them a bold and sturdy look. They combine the classic elements of serif typefaces with a more modern, robust design. Slab serifs are often used when you want to make a strong impression or need type that's easy to read at large sizes, such as in headlines or even logos. Some very popular slab serif typefaces are Rockwell, Clarendon, Sentinel, Envato Slab, and Arvo. Let's move on to script typefaces. These are inspired by handwriting, with letters that often flow into one another. They're designed to mimic cursive or calligraphy styles, giving a more personal, fluid feel to your design. Script fonts are typically used for invitations, logos, and anything that requires a touch of elegance or personality. Among script typefaces, we can find Brush Script, Lobster, Dancing Script, Great Vibes, and Pacifico. Next up, monospace. These typefaces are unique in that every character takes up the same amount of horizontal space. Unlike most fonts where the width of each letter can vary, every letter in a monospace typeface is equally spaced, giving the text a uniform and mechanical feel. This typeface category is often used in coding and programming because it makes it easy to align text or code. In this monospace category, we can find typefaces like Courier, Consolas, Monaco, Source Code Pro, and Fira Code. Finally, we have decorative typefaces, which are all about making a statement. These typefaces are highly stylized and often designed to evoke specific emotions or themes, like fun, elegance, or nostalgia. Unlike the more neutral categories like serif or sans serif, decorative typefaces often feature unique shapes, intricate details, or bold features that stand out in headlines, logos, and other design elements where attention-grabbing is key. There are tons of decorative typefaces, among which we can find Swashington, Advio, Whimsy, Alicia, and Pixie Ring. By the way, all of these can be downloaded from Envato. Here's a quick tip about decorative typefaces. They are not great for body text because they're very hard to read at small sizes. However, they are perfect for projects that need to stand out or create a specific vibe. So they're really great for things like big headlines or logos. With that said, be careful when using these highly decorative typefaces because they can overpower the rest of your design. Now, before we wrap up this lesson, you might ask, well, what about icon fonts? Icon fonts aren't technically typefaces in the traditional sense of the word because they don't contain letters. They're not made for reading text. Icon fonts have symbols or icons instead of traditional letters, and they're a very convenient way of adding icons to a web project. In this course, however, we're exploring web typography in the more traditional sense. So if you want to learn about icon fonts, you will have to do that on your own. Now, let's move on to probably what you're all waiting for, and that's choosing and pairing typefaces for the web. When it comes to choosing typefaces for the web, there are plenty of places to look, from free resources to premium sites. Here's a breakdown of some of the best options. First, Google Fonts. This is a vast collection of free open source fonts optimized for the web. It offers a variety of styles, from classic serif to modern sans serif, and everything in between. It's the go-to resource for web designers due to its ease of use, wide selection, and performance optimization. Then we have Adobe Fonts, previously known as Typekit. Adobe Fonts offers a premium selection of high-quality typefaces. It's perfect for designers who already use Adobe Creative Cloud, as it integrates seamlessly with apps like Illustrator and Photoshop. Another great platform for premium fonts is MyFonts. This features many well-known foundries and independent designers, making it an excellent source for high-quality commercial fonts. Then we have Envato. Apart from all the other digital assets you can download, this mega library includes over 50,000 premium fonts available under the same subscription. And these are just a few examples of platforms and marketplaces. These act like a hub, basically, that collects typefaces from multiple sources. But you can also go directly to the source by visiting the foundries or the independent designer's website. Among my favorites, we can find Swiss Typefaces, Type Supply, Just Another Foundry, Mark Simonson, and a Typo Foundry. And you'll notice that most of these typefaces are not free, some being quite expensive, and that's okay. Usually, premium typefaces are much better designed than free ones. They offer more styles, more features, and so on. Plus, designing typefaces is a very laborious process. It takes time and skill to create a beautiful and usable typeface. So it's absolutely normal for type designers to charge a premium for a good typeface. Now, we know the basics of typography. We know a little bit about the terminology. We know where to find good typefaces. So how do we pick the right ones? And most importantly, how do we pair typefaces for our project. And I'll start with a quote from a book called On Web Typography, written by Jason Santamaria. And the quote says, "There are many right answers, and no answers are really wrong. There are just different degrees of good." So in other words, when deciding between typeface A and typeface B, you're not necessarily making a wrong choice. It's just that, for example, typeface A might be a better choice for that particular project than typeface B. You'll find that most often picking the right typeface is striking a balance between the design consideration, the technical consideration, and also your own judgment. So when it comes to choosing and pairing typefaces for the web, there is no absolute truth. We have guidelines, right? And the more you follow those guidelines, the better choices you'll be making. So let's take a look at some of these guidelines for choosing the right typeface. The first one is to match the tone of the typeface to the brand you're designing for. And this is super important. The tone or the mood of the typeface should match the message the brand is trying to convey. For example, let's say we're building a website for a lawyer's website. Usually this type of brand should convey what? Professionalism, trust, authority, and credibility, right? So based on these keywords, we can go in one of two directions. The first one is a more traditional, more classic approach where we use serif typefaces. Many legal documents and books use serif typefaces, making them feel very familiar. Plus, serif fonts have a long history in print, which adds to that sense of professionalism. Not to mention the fact that most serifs are very readable, very suitable for long-form text, making them ideal for things like contracts and legal documents and even website content. The following three typefaces would work well for a lawyer's website: Garamond, Laura, and Baskerville. They look traditional, professional, and convey trust. Here's the website of Omar Ochoa Law Firm. This is using Frank Rule Libre for most of the big text. This is a more modern serif typeface available on Google Fonts, and it does a great job of conveying that sense of trust and professionalism you would expect from a law firm. Now, Frank Rule Libre is a modern revival of the classic Frank Rule typeface, and it's designed for use in both print and the web. Let's see how this would compare to, say, Garamond, which is a very classic serif typeface. If we look at these from afar, they don't seem that much different. Right away, we can tell they're both serif typefaces, but on a closer inspection, we start noticing the differences. Frank Rule has a more upright feel, making it look stronger and more formal. It has thicker strokes than Garamond, giving it more presence, more impact, especially in large-sized text. Garamond has softer, more flowing curves, less defined serifs, and a smaller contrast. This makes it a bit more sophisticated, but also less bold than Frank Rule. In terms of readability, both of these do a great job, but I would say Frank Rule is better for the web because of the increased X height and wider letter forms. This typeface would work well for both headlines and body text, although it's better suited for headlines because of its bolder nature and higher contrast. Garamond, on the other hand, would work much better for long-form text because of its lower contrast. Also, consider the fact that Garamond is a typeface with a long history, so this can make it seem more traditional, yeah, even academic. Now, earlier I said that when it comes to a lawyer's website, we can go in two directions. And the first one was the more traditional route, where we use a serif typeface. The other direction is to go for a more modern approach by using a sans serif. We would do this when that particular law firm wants to appear modern, more approachable, and digital friendly. Let's say the law firm specializes in startups, corporate law, tech law. Their clients are modern companies, which most likely have modern-looking websites. So in this case, the brand wants to convey something different than what we talked about previously. Here's an example of a more modern website for a law firm. Fritz Law features a modern, bold typeface. It mainly uses Barlow semi-condensed, which is a sans serif. It also uses caveat throughout the design to draw attention to certain words. Caveat is a script typeface, and it contrasts well with Barlow. It adds a certain playfulness and approachability to the design, something you don't encounter often in law-related websites. Now, Barlow semi-condensed is a very clean, geometric-looking typeface. If we look really closely, you'll notice the letter strokes are slightly rounded, giving it a very contemporary feel. If we compare it with Railway, which is a very popular sans serif, you'll notice that Barlow is very space efficient because of the letter width. Also, because it's more geometric, more rounded, it feels friendly yet professional. Railway has a more high-end feel to it. It's more elegant, more airy, which makes it more suitable for luxury, fashion, or creative websites. In terms of readability, Barlow is better suited for body text and UI elements because of its letter width. Railway works much better for display text, branding, decorative elements even. It's not a great choice for body text because it can be hard to read. If we look at these side by side, we can clearly see the differences in readability. The text on the left, set in Barlow semi-condensed, is much easier to read than the one on the right, which is set in Railway. So that's the first guideline you should follow when choosing type. Match the tone or mood of the typeface to the brand you're designing for. Now, the second guideline I recommend you follow is to always consider the context in which the typeface will be used. For example, a typeface that looks great in a large headline might not work very well in a small button or a navigation link. For example, Playfair Display, a very stylish serif typeface, works beautifully for large headlines due to its high contrast and elegant details. However, when used in small button text or navigation links, its thin strokes can become difficult to read. In contrast, a typeface like Inter or Envato is designed for clarity at small sizes, making it a better choice for UI elements while still pairing well with Playfair Display for a balanced typography system. A great example of this principle in action is the Omar Ochoa website, which we explored previously. If you remember, for its large text, it uses Frank Rule Libre, a serif typeface that adds a sense of authority and elegance. Meanwhile, for the rest of the text, it uses DM Sans, a geometric sans serif designed for clarity and legibility, especially at smaller sizes. The combination works beautifully, creating a balanced and professional typographic hierarchy. Now, the third guideline I want to talk about is testing typefaces in a real setting. If you're designing for a website, then try that typeface directly on a web page and don't just rely on mockups or previews or typeface specimens. Additionally, I recommend you avoid filler text. So no lorem ipsum. Instead, use content that's as close to the final text as possible. This matters because real content has natural variations in the word length, the sentence structure, and formatting, which can affect readability and spacing. Using actual text helps you see how that typeface will handle the different headlines, body text, UI text, ensuring that it's going to work well in its intended context. Also, very important, once you pick a typeface, go ahead and read that content for yourself, right? So set the content in that typeface and then read that text and see how it feels. Does it convey the right message? Does it have the right mood, right? Doing this will help you pick the right typeface. Now, let's move on to pairing typefaces. This is a powerful tool in web design. It allows us to create variety, contrast, and hierarchy, making it easier to organize content and guide the reader's eye. And you might ask, why bother pairing typefaces? Isn't one typeface enough? Using one typeface can work, but adding a second one introduces contrast and organization. It allows us to create clear divisions between the different type of content, between headlines, sidebars, and body text, right? And if you don't know where to start, here's a basic rule of thumb. When in doubt, pair a serif with a sans serif. This is one of the easiest combinations you can make, and it usually delivers a great result because these two types are naturally different. That's why you see this combination being used a lot. In this case, you would most likely use the serif for the big text, like headlines, and the sans serif for the body and interface text, because, as we know, sans serifs do really well in small sizes and when used for large bodies of text. Here's an example from 9 AM Health. This website uses STK Bureau Serif for the headlines and larger text, and STK Bureau Sans for the rest of the elements. This creates a clear hierarchy and contrast between the different text elements. The Reviton website uses RZA Light as the serif and Basis Grotesque as the sans serif. Here's another example, the website for Lifeforce. This uses yet another serif plus sans serif combination, more specifically Bradford and New Haas Unica. So now you might say, well, okay, serif plus sans serif, but which ones? There are thousands of these typefaces. Well, in his book called On Web Typography, Jason Santamaria has two key principles for pairing typefaces. Those are distinction and harmony. Let's start with distinction. Basically, you need to choose typefaces that look different enough to create contrast. That's why a serif works really well alongside a sans serif. Take a look at this pairing. We're using Libre Baskerville for the large type and Source Sans Pro for the body text. These are different enough so that we have a clear contrast between them. Something we should not do is pair typefaces that are too similar. They will just end up competing with one another and they won't add any variety. Take, for instance, Libre Baskerville and Libre Caslon. They're both serif typefaces and they are very similar. They kind of blend together and don't bring anything new to the table. Right, so that's distinction. What about harmony? Well, this basically boils down to pairing typefaces with similar structure. So we're looking at things like the X height, the proportions, or the overall shapes of the letters. Let's look at one of the combinations from before, Playfair Display plus Inter. We have the distinction part taken care of. Obviously, these look different enough to create contrast. But we also have harmony between them. Notice the X height is basically the same. The letter structure is also very, very similar. Notice the shape of the O, how it's not a perfect circle, but more of an oval. Plus, its axis is vertical. The lowercase t has a similar curve at the end of the stem. The lowercase a has the same structure. The letter width is roughly the same. This is a great typeface pairing because there is harmony between the two, but also enough distinction to create contrast. And this is something you should always aim for. If we take Playfair Display and pair it with Sophia Pro, it doesn't work so well. Sophia Pro is a more geometric sans serif typeface, meaning the letters resemble basic geometric shapes like circles, squares, etc. Sophia Pro also has a smaller X height than Playfair Display. And the letter shapes are also different. Look at the lowercase o, a, and g. They are almost perfect circles. The letter A also has a different structure. This is known as a single story A, as opposed to the double story A used in Playfair Display. Also, look at the lowercase t and how it's much more minimal in Sophia Pro. So whenever you're in doubt about pairing typefaces, just remember these two principles, distinction and harmony. On top of that, there are also two strategies that I want to share with you. The first one is to pair typefaces from the same superfamily. A superfamily contains typefaces that fall under multiple classifications. A very popular example is FF Meta, which includes a serif and a sans serif with multiple styles. Another example is Merriweather, which also has a serif and a sans serif version. Pairing these two is a really safe bet because they are different enough, but also harmonious because they belong to the same family. They were made to work well together. The second strategy is to pair typefaces made by the same designer. Take, for instance, Joanna and Gil Sans, two typefaces created by Eric Gill. Right away, we can notice a lot of similarities in the letter structure. The letters O are similarly round. The double-story A's have similar tails. The lowercase r's have similar shoulders. The link in the G is basically the same, and the examples can go on and on. So, to sum things up, when choosing typefaces for the web, consider free and premium resources like Google Fonts, Adobe Fonts, Envato, or independent foundries. Select typefaces that match the brand's mood or tone, and also factor in the context in which these typefaces will be displayed, ensuring that they are readable in headlines, body text, UI text, and so on. When pairing typefaces, aim for contrast and hierarchy by combining distinct yet harmonious typefaces, such as serif and sans serif. Use strategies like superfamilies or pairing typefaces made by the same designer. Now, let's move on to something a bit more technical, and that's creating typography systems for the web. A typography system is a structured approach to using type across a design project, ensuring consistency, readability, and also hierarchy. Okay, so it includes rules for font sizes, weights, line spacing, and also how type is applied across the entire design project or across the different elements like headings, buttons, and so on. Let's start with creating hierarchy through type. Imagine landing on a web page where every piece of text looks the same. No clear headings, no emphasis, just a wall of words. That would be exhausting, right? Well, to avoid this, we need to establish hierarchy by using a few key techniques. The first one is size. Larger text naturally attracts more attention. That's why a headline is usually much larger than the body text. Another technique involves the font weight. Bolder text is often used to highlight important points. Let's not forget about color. This is a powerful tool for creating hierarchy because the contrast it creates can make key elements stand out. You can also pair this with the font size. Another technique is spacing. More padding around elements or margin between them can help structure the content. And let's not forget about typeface combinations. Mixing two distinct typefaces can create very good visual hierarchy. In this example, we can clearly scan for the section titles because they have a different size, but they also use the same typeface, and that's different from the rest of the text. Hierarchy is important everywhere, but even more so in news or magazine website where there's tons of text content. Looking at the New York Times website, we can clearly get a sense of that hierarchy. The article titles are bigger, bolder, the different sections are labeled differently, so we can scan the information right away. Beyond hierarchy, we need to talk about font size, measure, and line height. These three elements dictate how comfortable a text is to read. For body text, the industry standard is 16 pixels or 1 rem. That's actually the default in most browsers. Of course, you can go below or above that. It's really up to you, but 16 pixels is usually the starting point. For headings and other text elements, we can have any font size, really. It depends on what typeface we're using, what context we're using it in. But I recommend you start with the base font size and then build it up from there. Next up, we have measure, which is the number of characters per line of text. The ideal measure, or line length, is around 45 to 75 characters. If a line of text is too long, the reader's eyes can lose track. If it's too short, reading becomes tiring because we're constantly searching for the start of a new line. Finally, the line height or leading represents the height of one line of text. A good rule of thumb is to use about 1.4 to 1.6 times the font size for easy reading. This range provides enough vertical space to improve readability without creating excessive gaps between lines. Shorter line height values can make the text feel cramped, reducing readability, while overly large values can break the visual flow, making it harder for users to track content efficiently. Additionally, the line height might depend on the typeface you're using, so keep that in mind. Also, the line height will usually decrease as the font size increases. So large headlines will usually have a line height, of about 1.2. Sometimes it can go as low as 1, so the line height is equal to the font size. But again, it also depends on the typeface. Let's look at this article on Medium. I think the typography is really good here. We have a clear sans serif for large text, and then a very clear, very readable serif for the body text. The font size for the body text is set to 20 pixels, with a 32 pixel line height, which equals to a 1.6 ratio. The measure is about 70 characters per line, and there's plenty of white space around and in between paragraphs, making large blocks of text very readable. Also, notice the article title is 42 pixels in size with a leading of 52 pixels, which equals to a ratio of 1.2. Next up, let's talk about web-safe fonts versus custom fonts. Web-safe fonts are pre-installed on most devices, so if a web page uses one of these fonts, the browser can just render that text directly. It doesn't need to download any additional files. Examples include Arial, Helvetica, Georgia, and Times New Roman. These are basically the fonts that you get by default on a new computer, smartphone, etc. On the other hand, if a website uses a custom font, like one from Google Fonts or Envato or some other service, in order to make sure that your website renders the text, or I should say if the browser renders your website's text the same way on every device, then you need to instruct the browser to download that custom font. And custom fonts can be added in a few different ways. If you're using Google Fonts, you can embed fonts directly via Google's servers. And it's very simple. Click on Get Font, then Get Embed Code, choose your platform, and then follow the instructions. If you want full control over font loading, then self-hosting those font files is also an option. You will need to download the files yourself and then copy them in your project directory. You'll probably find multiple formats like WOF2, WOF, EOT, and TTF. These represent the same font, but some are more optimized than others. For example, WOF2 is the most modern and optimized format, and it has the smallest file size. Now, once copied in your project directory, you would simply reference them in CSS using Typeface. We're including multiple formats for maximum compatibility. A word of caution, font files will slow down your website because they're just another asset the browser needs to download in order to render the page. So make sure you're only loading the fonts that you're actually using. If you have a family of, 16 different styles, and you're only using 3 of them in your designs, like regular, bold, and italic, for instance, then just load those 3 styles. Don't load the entire family. The more fonts you load, the bigger impact it's going to have on the performance. Now, something else you need to consider when creating typography systems is responsive typography. Just like the layout of the website, the typography needs to adapt to each device. For instance, a large headline that looks great on desktop may be too large on mobile, so we need to make sure it scales accordingly. Now, the way you do this depends on how you're building the website. If you're using CSS, then you might use a function like clamp. If you're building in Webflow or Framer, then you just set different font sizes for that element in different breakpoints, and the examples can go on and on. If you're interested in responsive typography, check out this course on Envato Tuts Plus that covers the topic in more detail. Finally, let's talk about accessibility. It doesn't matter how great your design is if people can't read the text, and there are a couple of guidelines you could follow to make sure that doesn't happen. First is color contrast. You need to make sure the text has a high enough contrast ratio with the background. And there are plenty of online tools that help you with that. The one from Web-sabe gives you a text preview, and it also has sliders you can use to tweak the color until you get a good enough contrast. Another guideline is to avoid all caps on long blocks of text. Making an entire block of text all caps considerably reduces readability. Just look at this example. It's the same text, same size, same typeface, same everything, except one block is set in all caps. All caps works if it's used in like a headline or a short text like button, link, or a badge, and so on. And finally, a big no-no is to place text in images. And what I mean by that is to render the text as an image. It might seem like a crazy idea, but back in the day, this was actually very popular because we didn't have a way to render custom text or custom typefaces in the browser. We would use the custom font in whatever software we had back then, Photoshop, for example. Then we would, clip the text, we would export it as an image, and then we would load that image in the web page. This was very common for navigation links. And this is a very bad practice because screen readers cannot read the text inside an image. It's as simple as that. As I said, it's crazy to think about that in 2025, but there you go, just in case. Remember, good typography isn't just about aesthetics. It's about making sure everyone can engage with your content. And with that, it's time to wrap up this lesson. Now, so far in the course, we've covered a lot of theory, so it's time to get practical. In the next lesson, I will walk you through selecting typefaces for a project and setting up the typography for a very simple website. Let's go. This video is brought to you by Envato. Unlimited downloads of high-quality assets and a full stack of AI tools. Every type of asset for any type of project. Follow the link in the description and start creating now. For this practical exercise, I have the wireframes for a 3-page website. We have a home page, an about page, and a contact page. Now, this website is for a fictional character called Robert Fox, who is a freelance UI designer and web developer. And Robert wants to create a website that's very bold, looking very expressive, and it helps bring out his creative identity. We also have the logo for Robert, which is this very geometric looking fox. Now, this wireframe contains the final text content of Robert's website in each of the 3 pages. So it's our job to figure out what typefaces we're going to use for it and create a very simple typographic system. And to do that, I've set up a simple page that allows us to create some styles for the headings, the different text elements like the paragraph, link, button, and block quote, some text styles for bold, italic, strike through, and all caps, and also some text sizes for small, regular, medium, and large text. And I've populated the text previews here with content that's taken from the actual wireframes, because I think it's more helpful to preview the typefaces using real text, real content. So when I do a project like this, the very first place I start with is the type scale or the typographic scale. This will basically dictate the font sizes I'm going to use throughout the project. And a type scale is basically a system of font sizes ranging from small to large. And the way you create it is very simple. You start with a base font size, and then you keep multiplying that with a specific ratio. So let's say you start with a base font size of 20 pixels, and you choose a ratio of 1.5, right? So you multiply 20 by 1.5, and that's going to give you the next font size in the scale. Then you would take that, you multiply it again with 1.5, and it's going to give you the next font size. And you keep going until you get the entire scale. Now, you could do this manually, or you can use certain tools that do this for you, such as typescale.com. So in here, you input the font size at the top, then you choose your scale, and the tool will automatically generate the font sizes for you. Yeah, you can choose between rem, pixels, and points. I'm going to choose pixels here. And you can also play around with the different fonts here. So if you want to, preview this using a different font, then you can do that, no problem. In my case, I'm going to start with a 22 pixel font size. It's considerably larger than the default 16 that we see in the browser, but because we're trying to create a bold looking website and one that has a lot of personality, I'm going to start with a large font size. So back in the tool, I'm going to set 22 as the base font size, and I'm going to choose a scale of 1.333, which is also known as a perfect fourth. And this is the kind of scale that it generates. You will notice that the smaller the scale, the less of a difference you will have between the font sizes. The bigger the scale, the bigger the difference between the font sizes. For my case, I think somewhere in the middle is a good place to start. Of course, you can always change this later. So now that we have the font scale, let's go ahead and apply these to the different elements in our design. So I'm going to jump to the typography page here, and I'm going to start with the heading 6 all the way at the bottom here. I'm going to set that to the next value. So not the body text value, which is the 22, but the next one, which is 29. So select the H6, set the font size to 29. Also, since I'm here, I want to set the line height. For this, I will go with 130%. Don't worry about the typeface we're going to use just yet. Right now, we're working on the font sizes. So let's do the same for the rest of the styles. For the H5, we're going to use 39 pixels and a line height of 130%. H4 will be 52 pixels with a line height of 120%. So, as I said in the course, the bigger the font size, the smaller the line height. H3 will be 69 pixels with a line height of 120%. H2 will be 92 pixels, and we'll set 110% as the line height. And finally, H1 will be 123 font size, 110% as line height. And also, I'll be making H1 and H2 uppercase. Next up, let's see about the typefaces. And to complement the bold and expressive and creative identity for Robert Fox, I chose two grotesque typefaces. So the first one is called Boldy Grotesque, and we'll be using this for large type. And then for the body text, we're going to use Resonate. Both of these are sans serif typefaces, and they fall under the grotesque category. To give you a bit of history, grotesque was actually the earliest form of sans serif type that came out in the early 19th century. And these typefaces feature, slightly irregular or awkward proportions. And that's why it actually got its name of grotesque. There's also a neo-grotesque category, which is a more refined version of the grotesque style. And that came out around the mid-20th century. You might know some of the neo-grotesque typefaces like Helvetica and WorkSans. But the reason Boldy here, Boldy Grotesque, works for the website that we're designing today is because it aligns with his identity, which is all about boldness and being expressive and being creative. As you can see, this typeface has a lot of personality, and it's also modern looking, which, you know, complements the modern logo that Robert Fox has. So both of these typefaces are available on Envato. The other one, Resonate, also a grotesque sans serif, but this is more neutral, and that's why I chose it. So let's look at a quick comparison between these two. So we have Boldy here on the top, and then we have Resonate on the bottom. Now, Resonate works much better in small sizes. That's why I will use it for the body text and the UI elements. Resonate is also relatively neutral. Therefore, it contrasts well with the other one, but it's also, I believe, harmonious because they're both grotesque. They both have, slightly quirky letter shape like this R that you see here. And their structure is similar in some regards. They both have a relatively high X height. The letter structure is very similar. You can see that, for example, in the T here. You see how this slopes right here at the top? We have a similar thing going on here, even though it's not as pronounced. The shapes of the O's is relatively similar, even though Boldy here is more condensed than the other one. They both have like vertical axes. So that's why I think the combination of these two works really well for this project. So now that we've picked the typefaces, let's go ahead and apply them to our typographic system here, and then create some text styles. So I'm going to select each heading style, and I'll apply Boldy to it, and just like that. And then we'll move on to the rest of the elements. So for the paragraph, I'm going to use Resonate. I'm going to set the font size to 22 pixels and the line height to 140%. Setting it higher than that, I think it's a little bit too much. So from what I've been testing, 140% is just the right amount of line height. Next up, we have the link. For this, we're going to use, again, Resonate. And for the links, I usually go for a smaller font size. So if we go back to our type scale, we can see that going down from our base font size, we have 16 pixels. So that's exactly what I'm going to use here. So 16 pixels, Resonate, regular, and I'm going to set, again, 140% as the line height. The button, Resonate, same stuff, basically. But I might go a little bit bolder here. So I'm going to choose a semi-bold for the font weight. Let's do the line height as well. And finally, the block quote. I'm going to change the font family. And let's do maybe 39 pixels for this. Let's see, is this too big? It might be a little too big. So let's go one step down, which is 29 pixels. Resonate. And let's go for the italic version instead of the upright. Let's also set the line height to be 130%. Next up, we have the various text styles here for bold, italic, strike through, and all caps. And I'm going to set these to Resonate. And I'm going to set their font size to 22, line height to 140%. So this allows us to see how our typeface will function in different contexts, right? So how does the bold text looks like? Does it have enough contrast with the regular version? How does the italic look like? And we actually need to set this back to italic here, right? Strike through, all caps. This is important. Whenever you're choosing a typeface, you need to be able to preview it in its different contexts. And finally, for the font sizes, I'm going to choose each one of these. I'm going to choose Resonate. And then I'll apply different font sizes for small, regular, medium, and large, based, of course, on the type scale that we chose. So the regular is going to be 22 with 140 line height. The small is going to be 16 with 140. This one is the next step up, which is 29 and 130%. And this one will be 39 with 130. Lovely. So these text sizes, even though they are the same as the headings, I can use them on different elements. Maybe, I have a paragraph that I want it to be like a really big font size in the page header or in a sidebar somewhere. Maybe I have a really small text, like an image caption, right? I need to create the different text sizes for these. So once I created, or I should say once I applied the typeface, the font size, and the line height to these elements, and I see that everything looks good, and I don't need to make any kind of adjustments right now, I can go ahead and apply these styles to my wireframe. But to make that a little bit easier for myself, in Figma, I can create text styles. These are collections of properties that I can reuse on different elements. So for instance, I can select this heading 1 style, and I can go to typography, create a new style, and I can call it heading/H1. And heading/H1 will basically create a new group here for heading, and then create that style as the H1. So now I can go into my wireframe, I can select this main headline from here, and from the typography section, I can choose that H1. And now any kind of change that I make to the H1 style, right? Let's change its font size to, let's say, 200 pixels, right? That's going to be reflected here, but also anywhere else in my Figma file. But let's go back to the original size. So now all I got to do is go back to typography, select each one, and create a corresponding text style. So now we have styles for H1 through H6. Let's go to this next section. I'm going to create a style for the paragraph. Same way, paragraph. I'm going to create a style for this link. I'm going to say link regular. I'm going to create a style for the button link. I'm going to say link button, and one for the block quote. Moving on. I'm not going to create any styles for these because in Figma, if I select this text and create a style, it doesn't really work with the mixed font weights here, right? So I have to create a separate one for bold, for italic, and so on. So I'm going to skip this step. Instead, I'm going to create styles for the text sizes. So now we have all of our text styles. Let's go ahead and apply it to the wireframe. And we'll start at the very top here. I'm going to select these 3 elements, and I'm going to choose link regular. I'm going to select these 2, and I'm going to select the small text because I want text that's a little bit smaller in the header and in the footer. And please notice that this wireframe is just that. It's a wireframe. It doesn't have any information about the final layout or the colors that we're going to use, or the typography for that matter. When we started, all the text elements are using Helvetica, right? But for me at least, when I'm designing a website and I start with a wireframe, the very first step I do is change the typography. So we changed the main headline. We can even make it a little bit bigger, like so. Let's choose this, hey, I'm Robert Fox. And let's use maybe like a headline, heading 4, maybe something a bit smaller, like an I meant an H5. Yeah, that works much better. This text, let's do a paragraph or maybe something a little bit bigger. What do you say if we do a text size medium? So that works pretty well. The button, select that. We'll do a link button, and then we scroll down. What about this section? This should be a small text, right? So by using the text styles, we choose small and we move on. Again, we're not worried about colors just yet or how the final layout will be. This represents a whole new section and a very important section. So let's assign it a tag that matches that importance. Let's do an H2 here. This one, let's do a simple paragraph. Scrolling down, this is what? A block quote. So we'll do block quote. These two, let's do small text. This was initially bold. So if I want to make it bold again, I can, detach this, make it bold or semi-bold or whatever weight I want. Let's go with semi-bold. And then I can create a new style and I can call it text size small bold. And I can use that on other elements as well. What about here? Let's select the heading first. This should be of greater importance, right? So let's do like an H4 here, or we could even do an H3. The text above, let's do a regular paragraph. And this information here, let's do like a small text. Then we'll grab the button and we'll assign the correct text style for it. And then for the footer, let's set this as small. These are links, so we'll assign the link regular, and we're done for the home page. Now, it's simply a matter of repeating the same process for the other pages. Now, I'm not going to do that. I think you got the idea, but I just wanted to show you the process. Like, where do I start? How do I pick a typeface and how I apply it to the project? How do I create a simple, typography system like I did here, and how I apply that to the wireframes? And you can see that just by changing the typefaces used, we can get a sense of how this project will look like. Typography is great like that. It just sets the mood, it sets the tone of the entire project. So now the next steps would be to, figure out the rest of the layout, the colors, and just polish the final version of this website. Now I'm just going to show you two example layouts of how this might look like once everything is done. So I prepared two of them for you here. Here is the first part of the homepage with the header and the hero section. So I haven't changed much on the typography. I just set the links here to use a medium weight instead of a regular, because, once I added the final colors and once I started to put everything in a proper layout, changing the font weight just felt like a good move. It just looked better to me. So I did that. Also, once I started putting everything together, I also changed the color of this paragraph. I went with a slightly more muted version of the color that I used on the main headline. Because again, overall, it made more sense when I take everything together, the typography, the colors. This creates a much more balanced look than having everything using that darker color. So that's one example of how this might turn out. Here's a quick look at the About page. This is what it could look like once everything is done. Notice how the headlines look like, how the paragraphs look like, and how everything combines with imagery and spacing to create a unique look for this website. And that's a wrap. In this course, we've covered the essentials of web typography, right? What is typography, how to choose, pair, and also use type effectively on the web. Now, it's time to put it into practice. So go ahead and experiment with typography, refine it, and just keep learning. It's an ongoing process. We'll always be learning about typography as we become better and better designers. So don't be afraid to experiment. Typography is a very powerful tool, so use it wisely. Also, don't forget to check out the Envato Tuts Plus YouTube channel for more content like this, but also to learn about web design, web development, and much more. It's all free, so make sure to also hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if you liked it. I'm Adi, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, take care.